going to continue basics lessons with all about markers. Now, what I was talking about in the introduction was that you want to use a dry erase marker, and it specifically says dry erase on it because other markers will either not come off of the whiteboard or you might not be able to see them clearly. So I'm going to go over 3 tips today all about markers. First, we're going to talk about the caps and why it's important to keep those on your markers. We're going to talk about how much pressure you put on a marker. You want to use a very light pressure on it so that you don't crush the ends. And then we're going to talk about how you store your markers so the ink stays really good for when you want to use them. So let's get started. First, keeping a cap on your marker is a good thing because it keeps it from drying out. And when it's dry, the ink will not wick to the top. It just stops because the moisture evaporating is pulling all the ink from the rest of the bottom of the marker. So you want to keep that so it's not dried out. Now what happens if you're writing and all of a sudden it starts drying out? So let's say, we're going to have a pen cap. We're going to draw our pen cap and we're coming along and you're starting to see through the ink as you write, and you're saying, this is getting harder and harder to read. And the more you draw, the fainter the letters get. And if you keep drawing, you're going, this isn't good. And then, of course, you'll have to stop and talk, right? And you're going to wave your arms around. So whenever you're stopping drawing, put the cap on, and then it will be less likely to dry out. And that's for a marker you can still use, but it's not quite dried out all the way just yet. So you want to make sure that as soon as you start being able to see through the line, put the cap back on. You can shake it a little bit if you want. And hopefully your marker will have a little bit more life in it so you can keep drawing. It might be that you need to swap it out and get another marker. Okay, so moral of the story is put your caps back on when you're not drawing. And that's even during your presentation. You'll see me put the caps back on my markers as I'm presenting on these videos because I don't want my markers to dry out. And it's very simple and it's a good habit to be in. And yes, it will make a clicking noise, but that's okay too. So let's go on to the next one. How much pressure do you use on a marker? Well, as you're drawing, especially when you're starting to see through the marker, it's very tempting to start using more pressure. But you want to make sure you use just a featherweight's amount of pressure on your marker, because if you press very hard, it will actually fracture or spread apart the fibers on the end, kind of explodes. You don't want that to happen because now there's more surface area and it's just going to dry out even faster and your line is going to be very fuzzy, so it'll be harder to see. So that's not so great. Now, next question is, how do you store your markers so that they will stay fresh? Also, notice that older markers, you can also tell they're getting old, is when they start leaving a shadow behind. And that's something that I'll talk about on how to get the shadow off your whiteboard in another video. But when you're storing your markers, a lot of times people have a pencil cup on their desk, right? And if you have an older marker, you want to store the marker point down. And then that will cause all that ink to start going towards the tip with the help of gravity. So you use the tools you've got, right? So gravity is your friend. And new markers, you don't have to worry so much about those because they are just fine. They are doing what they need and you don't need to have them pointed down. In fact, if you point a new marker down, it'll get too much ink in the end and then that'll be kind of a mess on your whiteboard. So your old markers point down, your new markers point up. And a lot of times I will use a pencil case and put all my markers in a pencil case so I can take them to my meetings. And that way they're lying flat, and that's kind of a neutral position, and it won't cause it to have too much ink or too little of ink. Now, when I get back from a meeting and I find out that some of my markers are starting to get a little transparent, that's when I take those out and find a mug or a can or something to put them in so they can be stored point down. So to summarize, put the caps on when you're not drawing. That keeps your marker from drying out. Use a featherweight amount of pressure, just enough to make your marks, and when you start seeing it transparent, resist the temptation to press harder, because that will not bring out more ink, it will just explode the tip. And then 3, store your markers either right side up for new ones or upside down for old ones.